What is a post-closing occupancy agreement and what does it mean? Hey everyone, it's Lydia with the Golesh Team, and today we're going to talk about what a post-closing occupancy agreement, or for short, a PCOA is. A PCOA is an extension to the contract that both the buyer and the seller have agreed to. A PCOA allows the seller to live there after closing or after the buyer officially owns the home for a certain period of time. The maximum time that a seller can live in the home is up to 60 days. Some PCOAs are only a few days. Maybe the seller wants to make sure that they close on the property and have a few days to move out. And in other cases, we might see a seller needs to live there for up to 2 months. The longest a seller can live there is up to 60 days. After that, the state of Colorado deems that it would be considered a true lease situation. Now, a PCOA in turn is turning the seller into the tenant and the buyer into a landlord. So it still kind of is, if you think about it, a very short-term rental. Most of the time, it's something that both the buyer and the seller agree to and have a weigh-in on because of the circumstances. So for instance, we might see it's a very competitive seller's market. It's really hard for the seller to be able to buy their next home without having sold their current home. And for that, they might need or want a PCOA. They might want to close on their current home, and then they can go ahead and have a couple months to find their next one. On the flip side, if it is a home that the buyer wants, and maybe the seller is waiting for their new build and selling now, then the buyer is willing to wait up until 2 months to go ahead and move into the home. So again, the buyer owns the home completely, but can't have full possession until the PCOA is completed. All right, so with real estate comes money, and let's talk about where that is in this case. Depending on the market will dictate if there is a cost to the PCOA regarding a day cost or a monthly cost in general. So maybe there's a $100 per day cost to the rental of the seller living there for the buyer. Maybe there's a 0-day cost. On the monthly side, maybe there's a $2,000 cost. Maybe there's a $0 cost. Again, all these terms can be decided and dictated by the seller and the buyer as well as the market. In a highly competitive seller's market, we typically see more of a free post-closing occupancy agreement, which means that the seller gets to live there for free for up to 2 months. Where's kind of the benefit to the buyer in this? Well, let's say you closed in the middle of May. Then your first monthly payment wouldn't be until July 1st, and that would mean, let's say the seller has a full 60 days, they'll move out mid-July, so even though you're paying your first payment in the beginning of July, you'll still get the opportunity to live in the home for at least half the month. In most cases, a post-closing occupancy agreement, even when there's $0 to the buyer, can still be a benefit to them because they end up getting the home that they want at terms that work for both the buyer and the seller. Another big cost that we talk about is the security deposit. So just like any sort of other rental situation, the seller is going to deposit or give the buyer a certain amount of money. This can either be a check at closing, or maybe the title company will help funnel that money from the sale side of the settlement statement to the buyer side. In any case, we usually see security deposits maybe from $500 to $2,000. On the average, I'd say we're right around $1,000 for what a security deposit is. A security deposit is something that the seller, again, has to give the buyer at closing. The buyer has then 2 options. They can either go ahead and take that check and hold on to it, or frame it, or put it in their wallet, or whatever they want. Or they can go ahead and deposit it. Regardless of what they do, within 30 days of when the post-occupancy ends, the buyer needs to give the seller back the security deposit so long as the condition of the property was the way it was supposed to be. So let's assume that the seller took care of the property while they lived in it and didn't poke holes in the walls and the floors and the ceiling, and everything was the way it was prior to closing. Then the buyer would go ahead and return that money. Let's use a summer example. Let's say the 15th of July, the seller moves out. Well, then by the 14th of August, the buyer needs to provide that check back, whether they rewrite a check and send it to the seller, or they actually take that physical check and mail it back to them as well. This is something that we here at the Golesh Team can definitely help with. A lot of times we help facilitate a little bit more just so communication between the buyer and the seller, A, stays nice and smooth, no one gets upset with each other, and B, it's just a convenience that we do to make sure that you have the right contact information and everybody gets the monies that they're supposed to when they're supposed to. Now let's talk utilities. If it's a longer post-occupancy, let's say anywhere from about 2 weeks to the full 60 days or 2 months, the seller is typically responsible for all of the utilities. gas, water, sewer, electric, you name it. If it's shorter than 2 weeks, sometimes the buyer may be responsible for that. And we usually see this in something where it's maybe a couple of days when it relates strictly to water. Water is a little bit different and a little harder to transfer than gas and electric. Even if we have a 3-day post-occupancy, we can go ahead and have the buyer postpone their gas electric bills to be not the day of closing, day of possession. We can also have the seller do the same. When it comes to water though, water is lienable. And what this means is instead of having the buyer go ahead and call to say, hey, in 3 days, we need our gas and electric set up, even though we've closed, we won't take possession. And same thing for the seller, hey, let's wait 3 days and transfer that. We have the title company take care of this. This means that there will be no liens for the buyer when they purchase their new home. So the title company works to transfer water from the seller's name to the buyer's name. And typically it's easiest in our experience to be able to do this at closing. So if it's a few days, we might say, well, is the buyer able to cover that small water bill for a few days? Should the seller leave some money for the buyer? Again, something we can work to negotiate. Now, if it's a longer post-occupancy, again, something that the seller will go ahead and cover. At the end of it, we just need to remember that each situation is very different and unique, and work with us so that we can help you negotiate your unique situation. Okay, so the PCOA is done. The seller has fully moved out, the buyer is moving in. Now what? Well, remember, you have 30 days for the buyer to return that check back to the seller. Now, we need to make sure that we're actually verifying that the condition of the property is in good condition. So if you're a buyer, I would do a second walkthrough, meaning before you drop your bags and your toothbrush and your comb, go ahead and walk through the property and make sure everything looks the way it's supposed to. It's a lot easier to be able to tell the seller, hey, we need something to be fixed because you didn't have it done during your possession phase, rather than saying, hey, we dropped all our stuff and now there's a problem. It could be hard to battle that out. So again, basically you'll just do a second final walkthrough prior to moving in once your PCOA is finished. For more questions on what a PCOA is and how we can work to negotiate your PCOA on your next either home sale or home purchase, let us know. From everyone here at the Golesh Team, I'm Lydia Golesh. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye.